Dos hermanas Apache me fueron entregadas como esclavas, hais lo impensable. Daniel had been traveling for many days, moving slowly through the rough terrain with nothing but a small pack on his back, and a map that seemed more like a collection of guesses than actual directions. He had heard stories of the remote settlements scattered across this land, places where people lived in harsh conditions, and some even spoke of injustices that no one dared talk about openly. Daniel had always been curious, but this curiosity had never led him so far from the comfort of towns and familiar faces. Now, here he was, following a narrow, dusty trail that wound through the hills, each step bringing him closer to something he could not yet imagine. As he walked, he could hear the distant sounds of life, chickens clucking, a dog barking, and occasionally the faint chatter of people. The trail finally opened into a small clearing, and Daniel could see a modest village spread across the valley below. The buildings were simple, made of wood and clay, and smoke rose from a few chimneys, curling lazily into the morning sky. Children ran between huts, laughing and playing, while adults moved with purposeful energy, tending to animals or performing chores. It was a place that seemed alive, yet he noticed a subtle tension in the air, something that made him cautious. Daniel's eyes were drawn to a small group of women working near the edge of the village. Their movements were quick but careful, and they carried out their tasks with quiet diligence. Among them, two sisters stood out. They were young, perhaps in their late teens, with dark hair that fell in gentle waves around their faces. Their clothes were plain, patched in several places, but they wore them with a sense of quiet dignity. There was something in their eyes, resilience, strength, and yet a flicker of sadness that made Daniel's heart tighten. He soon learned, through careful observation and whispered conversations with villagers, that these two sisters had been brought here under circumstances that no one spoke of openly. They were considered the property of a local family, treated as servants in a place that allowed very little kindness or freedom. Daniel felt a pang of sorrow mixed with anger. He had read about slavery and unfair treatment in distant lands, but seeing it so close, so real, stirred feelings he had never experienced before. The sisters moved gracefully despite their situation, their actions deliberate and cautious, as if every step had to be measured to avoid punishment. Days passed as Daniel stayed near the village, pretending to be a traveler resting along the road. He observed the sisters closely, learning their routines and the small ways they tried to maintain some dignity despite the harshness around them. One sister, the older of the two, would quietly hum while fetching water, a soft melody that seemed to lift her spirit for just a moment. The younger sister had a quick, observant mind, always noticing small details in the environment that others missed. Daniel admired their strength and courage. They were more than just victims. They were survivors, finding ways to endure without losing themselves entirely. Daniel began to interact with them cautiously. At first, he would only offer a smile or a kind word from a distance, careful not to attract attention. The sisters, at first wary, slowly began to respond, recognizing that he meant no harm. Over time, brief conversations became possible, mostly about safe, neutral topics like the weather, the land, or simple observations of village life. These small exchanges brought moments of warmth in a place where warmth was often scarce. Daniel felt a growing responsibility to protect them, even if he was unsure how. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky, Daniel noticed a tense scene near the sisters' living quarters. A man from the village, stern and loud, was scolding them for a minor mistake. Their faces showed fear, but also a quiet determination not to give in completely. Daniel's heart ached as he watched, knowing that he could not intervene openly without risking serious trouble for himself and possibly making their lives even harder. Yet he could not ignore the injustice, and he began thinking of ways to help without being seen. The sisters, daily life was filled with hard labor and endless demands. From early morning, they would clean, fetch water, prepare food, and complete chores that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Despite this, they found small moments of hope, sharing a quiet laugh over something small, encouraging each other silently, or finding comfort in the smallest acts of kindness from neighbors. Daniel watched and learned from them, realizing that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was the quiet endurance, the ability to keep going when the world seemed determined to crush your spirit. One evening, Daniel took a risk and left a small gift for the sisters. A piece of bread, wrapped carefully in cloth, left where they would find it without anyone noticing. The next day, he saw the older sister glance at the gift with surprise and gratitude, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. It was a small gesture, almost invisible to anyone else, but it carried a profound message. Someone cared, someone was willing to notice their suffering. For Daniel, this simple act became a turning point. He realized that helping them, even in small ways, was not only possible but necessary. As the days went on, Daniel grew more involved, carefully planning ways to support the sisters without drawing attention. He began leaving small amounts of food, water, and supplies, always mindful of who might be watching. He also listened to their stories, the things they shared in whispers about their lives before arriving at this village, their memories of family and home, and their hopes for the future. Each story strengthened his resolve, reminding him that these were human beings with dreams and feelings, not just shadows of oppression. Daniel faced a growing inner conflict. He understood the risks of getting too involved. The possibility of being discovered could bring serious consequences not just for him, but for the sisters as well. Yet, every time he saw them endure hardship with courage and grace, his hesitation weakened. He began imagining ways to do more, to offer them a chance at freedom, even though the path was uncertain and dangerous. It was a challenge unlike any he had faced before, a test of moral courage that forced him to confront what kind of person he wanted to be in a world that often rewarded silence and inaction. One morning, as he walked along the trail leading to the village, Daniel felt a mixture of fear and determination. He knew that sooner or later he would have to make a choice. Observing the sisters day after day had changed him. He could no longer ignore the injustice. At the same time, he understood that any action would require careful planning and courage, and that failure could have devastating consequences. His mind was filled with ideas, each more daring than the last, yet all rooted in the same goal: to give these two sisters a chance at a life free from fear and servitude. The bond between Daniel and the sisters, though still fragile, had grown into a quiet trust. They spoke in hushed tones when alone, sharing thoughts and fears that could not be spoken in public. Through these moments, Daniel discovered their intelligence, their resilience, and their unwavering desire for freedom. It was this bond that gave him the courage to contemplate the impossible, to imagine taking action where few would dare. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the village, Daniel had made up his mind. He could no longer stand by as a mere observer. The choice was clear, though the path ahead was filled with uncertainty and danger. In that moment, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavy but necessary. He knew that the days to come would test him in ways he had never experienced, but he also knew that some acts of courage, however small at first, could change the course of lives forever. As night fell over the village, Daniel looked toward the small, simple huts where the sisters slept. The quiet strength in their lives, their unwavering spirit despite all they had endured, filled him with a resolve that he could not ignore. The story of these two sisters was no longer just an observation, it was a call to action. And though he did not yet know exactly how he would achieve it, one thing was certain. He was ready to do the unthinkable, whatever it took, to help them reclaim their dignity and freedom. The next morning, Daniel returned to the village with a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. The first rays of sunlight had just touched the dusty paths, and the villagers were already busy with their daily routines. He walked slowly, observing everything carefully, making sure he did not draw attention to himself. The two sisters were outside, gathering water from the small stream that ran along the edge of the village. They worked silently, moving with quiet precision, aware of every watchful eye around them. Daniel could see the tension in their shoulders, the careful way they carried out each task, as if any small mistake could invite punishment. He approached the stream but stayed at a distance, pretending to be a traveler who needed a moment of rest. As he watched the sisters, he noticed small details he had missed before. The way the older sister's eyes flicked toward the village constantly, and the younger sister's hands trembling slightly as she lifted the water. These were not signs of weakness, but evidence of lives lived under constant caution, lives that had taught them to survive quietly. Daniel felt a wave of sorrow mixed with admiration. These sisters were more than just victims. They were fighters in their own silent way, and he could not turn away. Over the next few days, Daniel became more observant, learning the patterns of the sisters' daily lives. He noticed how they spoke in hushed tones when alone, how they shared small moments of laughter and comfort in secret, and how they tried to maintain dignity despite the cruelty of their situation. One afternoon, he saw the younger sister skillfully fixing a torn piece of cloth, her hands moving quickly and efficiently. The older sister watched over her, guiding her silently, offering subtle encouragement. It was a small scene, but it spoke volumes about their bond and resilience. Daniel wanted to help, but he knew he had to be careful. Any sudden action could bring danger not only to the sisters but also to himself. He began to think creatively, finding ways to support them without being seen. Sometimes, he left small gifts hidden along the paths they took, extra food, a clean cloth, or small tools that might make their work easier. The sisters discovered these gifts quietly, often exchanging a glance of surprise and gratitude before slipping away to use them. Daniel watched from a distance, his heart lifting at the small victories. Even tiny acts of kindness mattered in a world that had given them so little. The sisters began to notice Daniel more actively. They were cautious at first, unsure of his intentions, but over time, they recognized his care and sincerity. He would speak to them in low, careful whispers when no one else was around, asking about their health, offering encouragement, or simply sharing a friendly smile. These brief moments of connection became a lifeline for the sisters, small reminders that not all people in the world were cruel. Daniel felt a growing sense of responsibility. He was no longer a distant observer but someone who had become entwined in their lives in a meaningful way. Life for the sisters remained difficult. They worked from dawn until dusk, performing tasks that seemed endless. From fetching water to cleaning, cooking, and running errands for their masters, each day was a test of endurance. The villagers rarely showed kindness, and any misstep could result in harsh words or punishment. Daniel saw how these challenges shaped the sisters, forging their courage and determination. Even in the face of fear and exhaustion, they found small ways to support each other. A shared smile, a word of encouragement, a brief moment of laughter. These moments, though fleeting, were powerful acts of resilience. One afternoon, as Daniel watched from a hidden spot, a man from the village confronted the sisters over a minor mistake. His voice was loud, filled with anger, and his gestures were aggressive. The sisters lowered their heads, their faces calm but tense, absorbing the reprimand without responding. Daniel felt a surge of frustration and helplessness. He wanted to step forward, to protect them from this unfair treatment, but he knew that doing so openly would make things worse. He had to think carefully, planning ways to help them in secret, without drawing attention or endangering them further. The sisters' intelligence became more evident with each passing day. They were quick to learn, observant of details, and skilled at finding ways to cope with their situation. The older sister often found subtle ways to ease their burdens, while the younger sister would watch carefully for signs of danger or opportunity. Daniel admired their cleverness and adaptability. He realized that their survival was not just about endurance, but about strategy, about finding ways to navigate a world that seemed determined to limit them. He felt a growing respect and connection to them, understanding that any help he offered had to honor their strength and autonomy. As the days went on, Daniel's efforts became more deliberate. He left small bundles of food near their work areas, sometimes hiding clean water or fresh cloths. Each act was calculated to avoid detection, yet it allowed the sisters to experience small moments of relief and hope. One evening, he watched the older sister find a bundle of food he had left, her eyes widening in surprise. She glanced around, and their eyes met for a fleeting moment. In that silent exchange, Daniel felt a sense of connection, a shared understanding that transcended words. It was a small but meaningful bond, one built on trust and the shared desire for freedom and dignity. The sisters also shared parts of their past with Daniel, speaking in quiet whispers when no one else was nearby. They told him about their home before arriving in the village, their family, and the life they had once known. These stories were filled with both sadness and hope, memories of love, laughter, and freedom that had been taken from them. Daniel listened carefully, understanding that these stories were a vital part of who they were. They were not just survivors of hardship. They were individuals with dreams, feelings, and memories that deserved respect and protection. Daniel's connection to the sisters strengthened his resolve. He began imagining ways to give them a chance at freedom, even though the path was uncertain and dangerous. He considered the risks carefully, understanding that any misstep could have serious consequences. Yet the more he observed the sisters, the more he realized that he could not ignore their plight. Each day that passed, he felt an increasing sense of responsibility, a moral obligation to act. He began planning quietly, considering options, routes, and possibilities, knowing that careful preparation was essential. The bond between Daniel and the sisters grew stronger as trust developed. The sisters began to share small details about their hopes for the future, dreams of life beyond the village and the hardships they faced. They spoke cautiously but with growing confidence, sensing Daniel's sincere desire to help. He encouraged them gently, offering reassurance and support, helping them envision a future in which they could live with dignity and freedom. These conversations, though limited, provided a spark of hope in a world that had often denied them kindness. One evening, Daniel found himself standing at the edge of the village, watching the sisters return from their chores. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the land, and the air was filled with a quiet tension. He knew that his plan to help them would not be simple. The village was watched carefully, and any sudden action could provoke suspicion. Yet, as he observed the sisters walking together, supporting each other silently, he felt a determination growing within him. He would find a way to help them, no matter the risks. The days blended into one another as Daniel continued his careful watch. Each small act of kindness, each whispered conversation, and each shared smile strengthened their bond. The sisters began to rely on him in subtle ways, knowing that he was someone who cared deeply about their well-being. Daniel, in turn, felt a growing courage, fueled by the quiet strength of the sisters. He realized that true courage was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was the steady, persistent determination to do what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. By the end of the second week, Daniel knew he could not wait any longer. The sisters' suffering was ongoing, and the small gestures of help he had made, while meaningful, were not enough. He had learned enough about the village, the routines of the sisters, and the people who controlled their lives to begin considering a more daring plan. He knew the risks were high, but he also understood that inaction was no longer an option. The time for careful observation had passed. It was time to take steps that could change their lives forever. That night, as he lay under the open sky, Daniel thought about the sisters, their courage, and the hope he had seen in their eyes. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, filled with uncertainty and danger, but he also knew that he could not turn away. The bond he had formed with the sisters, the trust they had placed in him, and the injustice he had witnessed demanded action. In that quiet moment, he made a silent promise to himself. He would do everything in his power to give these two sisters a chance at a life free from fear and oppression. The days that followed brought a mixture of anticipation and fear for Daniel. He had spent weeks observing the sisters, learning their routines, and leaving small gifts and support in secret. But now, the situation demanded more than quiet acts of kindness. The thought of the sisters' continued suffering weighed heavily on him, and he realized that the time for careful observation had passed. He had to act, but he also had to be cautious. One wrong move could put everyone in danger, including the sisters he had come to care for deeply. Daniel spent hours each day watching the village, noting the movements of the people who controlled the sisters' lives. He noticed patterns: when certain villagers left for work, when guards were distracted, and when the sisters had brief moments alone. He memorized the layout of the huts, the paths to the nearby woods, and the locations where help or danger might appear. Every detail mattered, and he reviewed them over and over in his mind, creating a plan that was as careful as it was bold. Meanwhile, the sisters' lives continued to be difficult. They worked from dawn until dusk, performing tasks that seemed never-ending. The older sister carried herself with quiet strength, always protecting the younger one when possible. The younger sister, though smaller and more delicate, displayed sharp intelligence and a quick mind, noticing small details that others overlooked. Together, they navigated the hardships of the village, finding small ways to support one another and maintain dignity despite the harsh circumstances. Daniel watched them with a mixture of admiration and concern, feeling the urgency to help them escape the life of servitude they had been forced into. One morning, Daniel noticed tension rising in the village. A new overseer had arrived, stricter and less tolerant than the previous one. He moved through the village with sharp eyes and a harsh tone, scrutinizing every action. The sisters' movements became even more cautious, their every step calculated to avoid drawing attention. Daniel felt a cold shiver of fear. The stakes had grown higher, and any misstep could lead to punishment not only for them but for anyone who might try to help. He knew that now, more than ever, careful planning was essential. Despite the growing danger, Daniel began taking small, calculated risks. He moved closer to the sisters when he could, offering whispered words of encouragement. He left more supplies in secret locations, ensuring they would have small comforts that made their daily life slightly easier. Each act required precision and timing. He had to be invisible to the overseer and the villagers who might report him. The adrenaline of these small risks made him both nervous and determined. He knew that every successful act, however small, built trust and prepared the ground for the larger plan he was beginning to form. The sisters began to notice the pattern of Daniel's help. At first, they were cautious, unsure if these gestures were safe or if someone would be punished for them. But over time, they realized that Daniel genuinely cared for their well-being. Quiet glances, subtle nods, and whispered words of thanks became their secret way of communicating trust. These moments, though brief, created a fragile bond between them that strengthened Daniel's resolve. He knew that he had to act soon, but he also understood the importance of timing. Any rash move could ruin everything they had worked toward. One afternoon, a crisis occurred that forced Daniel to act. The overseer had grown suspicious of the sisters' behavior and confronted them harshly over a small error. His voice was loud and angry, and his gestures were aggressive. The sisters lowered their heads, enduring the reprimand without protest, but Daniel could see the fear in their eyes. Something inside him snapped. He could not stand by and watch them suffer any longer. He moved carefully, positioning himself so that he could intervene if necessary without drawing attention. For the first time, Daniel took a direct but cautious action. He created a distraction, tossing a small stone into a distant area, drawing the overseer's attention away from the sisters. The sisters froze for a moment, unsure if they could trust him, but when they saw the overseer move toward the sound, a subtle sense of relief passed between them. Daniel's heart pounded as he realized how close the risk had been. One small miscalculation could have endangered all of them. Yet, for the first time, he felt the possibility of success, the idea that he could actually help them escape their harsh life. Over the next few days, Daniel's confidence grew, and he began to think in more detail about a plan for their eventual freedom. He studied the terrain around the village, noting safe paths through the woods and identifying places where they could hide if discovered. He also began paying attention to the villagers' routines, learning who might be sympathetic and who could pose a threat. Every observation, every small calculation, added another piece to the puzzle. He knew that timing, patience, and precision would be crucial to success. The sisters continued their daily routines, unaware of the full extent of Daniel's planning. They remained cautious, understanding the dangers of the village, but they began to trust him in small ways. He would speak to them quietly, offering suggestions for safety or encouragement to endure. The older sister, in particular, began to confide in him more, sharing small details of her fears and hopes. The younger sister, though more reserved, began observing him closely, sensing that he was someone who might help them achieve the impossible. As the days passed, Daniel noticed subtle signs that the overseer was growing more suspicious. He would pause and watch the sisters more closely, ask questions about their activities, and occasionally search their living area. The tension in the village increased, and Daniel realized that any delay in action could put the sisters at even greater risk. He began preparing more urgently, gathering supplies, mapping escape routes, and rehearsing scenarios in his mind. Every detail mattered, and he approached the task with a mix of caution and determination. One night, under the cover of darkness, Daniel met with the sisters in secret. They huddled together in a small, hidden space near the edge of the village. He explained to them that he had been observing, planning, and preparing for the possibility of helping them escape. The sisters listened intently, their eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. Daniel reassured them that he had thought through the risks and that every step would be taken with care. He also reminded them of their own strength, the courage, intelligence, and resilience that had allowed them to survive in the village for so long. The sisters nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They knew that escape would be dangerous, that failure could mean punishment or worse. Yet, in Daniel's words and in his careful planning, they sensed a genuine opportunity. They trusted him, even though the path ahead was uncertain. In that quiet, tense moment, a silent agreement formed between them, a shared determination to face the unknown together, guided by courage and hope. In the days that followed, Daniel and the sisters began to prepare in earnest. He taught them how to move quietly, how to observe and avoid detection, and how to rely on each other for support. He left small supplies along potential escape routes, ensuring that they would have food, water, and basic necessities during their journey. The sisters practiced careful movements, learning to anticipate danger and act with precision. Each day, their bond with Daniel grew stronger, and their own confidence in the possibility of freedom increased. Despite the growing tension, the village continued its daily routines. Life appeared normal to outsiders, but beneath the surface, careful planning and quiet determination were at work. Daniel watched the sisters closely, noting their strengths, their fears, and their subtle ways of communicating. He marveled at their resilience, their ability to endure hardship without losing hope. Every small act of courage, every whispered conversation, and every shared glance added fuel to his determination. He knew that the coming days would test them all, but he also knew that they were ready to face the challenges together. As the sun set on the third week, Daniel felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The plan was taking shape, and the moment of action was approaching. He had studied the village, learned the patterns of its inhabitants, and prepared for every possible obstacle. The sisters, though nervous, were ready to trust him and follow his lead. Together, they would face danger, uncertainty, and the unknown. And together, they would take the first steps toward a life free from oppression, guided by courage, trust, and determination. The night was dark and still, with only the faint glow of the moon lighting the edges of the village. Daniel crouched behind a small hill near the edge of the woods, his heart pounding in rhythm with every sound of the night. He had waited for this moment for weeks, planning every detail, memorizing every path, and observing every movement of the villagers. Tonight was the night. The plan they had rehearsed in whispers and quiet meetings would finally be put into action. There was no turning back. The sisters were hidden in the small, abandoned shed near the village's edge. They had packed only what was necessary, small pieces of bread, a bit of water, and a few personal belongings. Their faces were pale but determined, eyes wide with both fear and hope. The older sister placed a comforting hand on her younger sister's shoulder, silently reminding her that they were together and that courage would carry them through. Daniel approached quietly, signaling that it was time to move. The sisters nodded, trusting him completely, though they knew the risks were enormous. They began to move carefully and silently, sticking to the shadows. Every step was deliberate, calculated, and slow. The village was quiet, but the possibility of discovery loomed over them like a dark cloud. Daniel led the way, pointing out paths that offered cover and avoiding areas where lights or patrols might reveal their presence. The sisters followed closely, their breathing controlled, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. Every sound, an animal rustling in the bushes, the distant bark of a dog, or the snap of a twig underfoot, made them freeze for a heartbeat, hearts racing with tension. As they moved through the first part of the village, a lantern suddenly swung near the main path. Daniel froze, signaling for the sisters to remain hidden. A villager walked past, muttering to himself, unaware of the small group pressed against the shadows. The sisters held their breath, their hands gripping Daniel's shoulders lightly for reassurance. Once the villager moved out of sight, Daniel signaled them to continue. The moment had been tense, but it strengthened their resolve. Each small obstacle overcome brought them closer to freedom and closer to the realization that their courage was greater than their fear. They reached the edge of the village and entered the dense woods. The smell of damp earth and pine filled the air, a strange comfort after the oppressive confines of the village. The sisters followed Daniel, trusting his guidance completely. The forest offered cover, but it also presented challenges. Uneven ground, hidden roots, and low-hanging branches threatened to slow them down. Daniel had chosen this route carefully, knowing that the woods would be their best chance to escape undetected. He moved quietly, constantly checking behind them to ensure that no one had noticed their departure. As they pressed deeper into the forest, the sisters began to feel a small spark of hope. The older sister whispered a quiet word of encouragement to the younger one, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. They could feel the freedom of the open woods, away from the watchful eyes of the village. Yet, the danger was far from over. The overseer or any villager who realized they were missing could be pursuing them at any moment. Daniel reminded them to stay close and keep moving, urging them to focus on each step, one at a time. Hours passed as they moved cautiously through the forest. They stopped occasionally to rest, hiding behind large trees and thick bushes. Daniel distributed small pieces of bread and water, ensuring that the sisters had enough energy to continue. Despite the exhaustion and fear, there was a growing sense of determination among them. Each step away from the village was a step toward a life they had only dreamed of, a life where they could make their own choices, walk without fear, and live with dignity. The journey through the forest was not without danger. At one point, the sound of voices and the crackling of fire alerted them to villagers searching nearby. Daniel quickly guided them off the main path, through a narrow passage barely wide enough to fit, and waited silently as the searchers passed. The sisters pressed against him, their faces pale but determined. The tension was unbearable, but they had no choice but to keep moving. Every risk taken was worth it for the chance at freedom. As dawn approached, the group reached a small clearing. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow on the path ahead. Daniel paused, allowing the sisters to catch their breath. They looked at each other, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and lingering fear. For the first time in many weeks, they could feel the possibility of a life beyond the village, free from oppression and fear. The older sister held her younger sister's hand tightly, and Daniel reassured them with a gentle nod. Their courage had brought them this far, but the journey was not yet over. They continued through the forest, moving carefully but with growing confidence. The sisters' steps were lighter, their movements more fluid, as the fear of immediate danger began to lessen. Daniel remained vigilant, constantly scanning the surroundings, aware that any moment of carelessness could undo all their efforts. The bond between them strengthened with every step. They relied on each other completely, understanding that their survival depended on teamwork, trust, and courage. During a brief rest near a stream, the sisters shared stories in whispers, recounting memories from their past lives, moments of happiness and small hopes for the future. The older sister spoke of the simple joys she missed, sunlight on her face, the sound of birds, and the freedom to choose her own path. The younger sister shared her dreams of learning, exploring, and living without fear. Daniel listened, feeling a deep sense of responsibility and admiration. He realized that what they were experiencing was not just a physical escape, but the reclaiming of their lives and their dignity. As they neared the edge of the forest, a final challenge awaited them, a wide, fast-flowing river that separated the woods from the distant hills where safety awaited. The river was dangerous, with strong currents and slippery rocks, but it was their last obstacle. Daniel carefully guided the sisters, helping them navigate the treacherous water. Their hands clutched as tightly, and every step was deliberate, measured, and careful. The cold water bit at their skin, but the thought of freedom pushed them forward. With determination and teamwork, they crossed the river, each step bringing them closer to safety and farther from the life that had held them captive. Finally, as the sun rose higher, they reached the other side. Exhausted but triumphant, the sisters collapsed on the grass, breathing heavily but smiling for the first time in weeks. Daniel stood beside them, surveying the forest they had left behind. The village, the overseer, and the dangers of that life were now far behind them. For the first time, they felt a sense of true freedom, a chance to begin anew. They had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, and yet they had prevailed through courage, determination, and trust. In that quiet moment, the sisters expressed their gratitude to Daniel in simple, heartfelt words. Their eyes reflected a mix of relief, hope, and the recognition that their lives had changed forever. Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment that he had never experienced before. He had risked much to help them, and seeing them free made every danger, every moment of fear and every calculated risk worth it. As they rested and recovered, the sisters began to plan their next steps with Daniel. They discussed where to go, how to find shelter, and ways to ensure their continued safety. Though the journey ahead was uncertain, they faced it with newfound courage. The forest had been their first barrier, and they had overcome it together. They had proven to themselves that they could endure hardships, face danger, and still emerge stronger. The future was now theirs to shape, guided by hope, determination, and the bond they shared. That night, as they settled in a small, hidden area near the hills, Daniel reflected on the events of the day. The escape had been daring, dangerous, and almost unimaginable, but it had succeeded. The sisters were safe, at least for now, and the first steps toward a new life had been taken. He knew that challenges would continue to arise, but he also knew that they had the courage and resourcefulness to face whatever lay ahead. Their trust in each other, combined with his guidance, had carried them through the most dangerous night of their lives. In the quiet of the night, the sisters finally allowed themselves to rest fully, no longer weighed down by immediate threats. Their faces were serene, their breathing steady, and their hearts lighter than they had felt in weeks. Daniel sat nearby, keeping watch, understanding that while the night had been won, the journey was not yet over. They were free, but freedom required careful planning, vigilance, and continued courage. Yet, for the first time, the sisters could imagine a life beyond oppression, a life in which they could make choices, find joy, and live without fear. The dawn of the next day brought a sense of calm and renewal. The forest was quiet, the air fresh, and the distant hills promising safety. Daniel, alongside the sisters, began moving toward a more secure area where they could rest, regroup, and plan their future. Each step was filled with purpose, guided by hope and determination. They had faced danger together, trusted one another fully, and emerged stronger. The daring escape had been accomplished, and now the work of building a new life could begin. The first light of dawn stretched across the hills, painting the sky in shades of soft gold and pale pink. After the long night of their daring escape, Daniel and the sisters moved cautiously toward a small, hidden valley that promised safety and shelter. The forest behind them was dense, but the distant hills ahead held the promise of freedom and a new beginning. Their bodies were tired, muscles aching from the run through woods, river, and uneven terrain, but their hearts carried a sense of hope that no exhaustion could diminish. The sisters leaned on each other and on Daniel, their trust in him unwavering. Every step they took felt lighter than before, each movement carrying the weight of possibility instead of fear. They had left the village far behind, and with it, the oppressive eyes and harsh hands that had dictated every part of their lives. Though the path ahead was uncertain, they knew they had survived the most dangerous part of their journey. Courage, careful planning, and trust had carried them through, and now they were ready to embrace the life that awaited them. After several hours of careful travel, they arrived at a small, secluded area near a gentle stream. The place was hidden from view, with thick bushes and tall trees providing natural cover. Daniel led the sisters to a dry, flat space where they could rest, eat, and gather their strength. For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to sit without fear of being seen, leaning against each other and letting out sighs of relief. The older sister's hand found the younger one's, and they squeezed gently, sharing a moment of quiet gratitude for the courage that had carried them this far. Daniel unpacked the small supplies he had brought with him, offering food and water to the sisters. They ate in silence, savoring each bite, the simple act of eating no longer a chore but a reminder of life beyond hardship. The older sister glanced at Daniel, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more profound, a deep recognition of the sacrifice and bravery he had shown. Daniel smiled gently, his heart full of a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. He had acted on a promise to protect and help them, and seeing them safe made every risk worth it. Once they had rested, the sisters began to speak softly about their hopes for the future. The older sister talked about wanting to learn, to read and write, and to build a life where she could make her own choices. The younger sister shared her dream of seeing the world beyond the village, of exploring new places and meeting people who treated her with kindness. Daniel listened attentively, offering reassurance and encouragement. He reminded them that the journey ahead would require patience and planning, but that together they could achieve the freedom and life they had longed for. The next few days were spent moving carefully through the hills, seeking safety and shelter away from the village. They avoided paths that might be traveled by others and used the skills Daniel had taught them to navigate quietly and cautiously. Each step brought them closer to security, but Daniel remained vigilant, aware that danger could appear at any moment. The sisters grew stronger and more confident with each passing day, learning to trust their instincts and each other. Their resilience, once focused only on survival, now began to turn toward building a future. Eventually, they found a small settlement far enough from the village to provide security. It was a peaceful place where the people were kind, working together in simple, honest ways. Daniel introduced the sisters cautiously, ensuring that they would be welcomed without drawing attention to their past. The community offered them food, a place to rest, and work that was fair and safe. For the first time, the sisters felt a sense of belonging and the possibility of independence. They could start to heal from the trauma of their past and begin living a life they had never thought possible. In the weeks that followed, Daniel continued to guide and support the sisters as they adjusted to their new environment. They learned new skills, made connections with kind people, and explored the hills and streams around the settlement. Their laughter began to return, small at first but gradually growing louder and more confident. The sisters shared stories of their experiences, sometimes in quiet reflection, sometimes with light humor, finding strength in remembering how far they had come. Daniel watched them with pride, amazed at the courage and adaptability they had shown throughout their journey. The older sister began to take on responsibilities in the settlement, helping others and learning new tasks that allowed her to feel capable and independent. The younger sister focused on learning and exploring, her curiosity about the world growing stronger each day. Together, they supported each other, their bond strengthened not just by shared hardship but by shared triumphs. Daniel continued to offer guidance, but he also encouraged them to make their own decisions and take ownership of their lives. The power of choice, once denied to them, became a central part of their newfound freedom. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, the sisters sat quietly by the stream, reflecting on their journey. The older sister spoke first, her voice soft but confident. She expressed gratitude for Daniel's courage, his guidance, and the trust he had placed in them. The younger sister echoed her feelings, sharing how much she had grown and learned through the experience. Daniel listened, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment and quiet pride. He realized that their survival and growth were not only a testament to their strength, but also to the power of compassion and moral courage. Daniel encouraged them to look forward, to imagine a life filled with possibilities rather than limitations. He reminded them that the world was vast and full of opportunities, and that their experiences, though painful, had prepared them to face challenges with wisdom and courage. The sisters absorbed his words, feeling a renewed sense of hope and determination. They understood that their freedom was not just a gift but a responsibility, to live fully, to learn, and to embrace the choices that lay ahead. Over time, the sisters' lives began to flourish. They formed friendships, learned new skills, and contributed to the community that had welcomed them. Their past hardships remained a part of their story, but they no longer defined them. They had reclaimed their dignity, their autonomy, and their sense of self. Daniel continued to be a guiding presence, offering advice when needed but allowing them the space to grow independently. The bond between them, forged through danger and trust, remained strong, a lasting connection that would endure for years to come. As the years passed, the sisters grew into confident, capable women. They pursued education, work, and personal interests, living lives filled with choice, dignity, and joy. They often reflected on the journey that had brought them from fear and oppression to freedom and hope. The memory of the village, the dangers they had faced, and the moments of courage and trust remained vivid, serving as a reminder of what they had overcome. Their lives were no longer defined by captivity, but by the strength, resilience, and determination that had guided them to safety. Daniel, too, reflected on the journey, understanding the profound impact it had on his life. He had taken risks, faced fear, and acted on a moral conviction that demanded courage. The sisters' growth and happiness were the reward for his determination and compassion. He realized that true courage was not only about facing danger, but also about standing up for what was right, even when the outcome was uncertain. Their shared journey had changed all their lives, leaving a lasting imprint of hope, trust, and moral courage. In the quiet evenings by the stream, the sisters would sometimes speak softly about the past, remembering the hardships they had endured and the steps that had led them to freedom. They acknowledged the risks Daniel had taken, the careful planning, and the unwavering dedication that had allowed them to escape. But they also celebrated their own courage, the resilience, intelligence, and determination that had made the escape possible. Their reflections were a mix of gratitude, pride, and hope, a recognition that the future was theirs to shape. Eventually, the sisters found a sense of stability and belonging that they had never known. Their lives were filled with purpose, joy, and meaningful connections. They became examples of courage and resilience to others in the settlement, inspiring those around them with their story and determination. Daniel remained a respected and valued friend, a guiding presence who had helped them navigate one of the most dangerous and challenging chapters of their lives. Together, they had transformed fear and oppression into hope, freedom, and possibility. The sisters' journey was a testament to the power of courage, trust, and determination. They had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, endured fear and hardship, and yet had emerged stronger, wiser, and free. Their lives were now defined not by what they had suffered, but by what they had overcome. Daniel's role had been crucial, but the sisters' strength and resilience had made the difference. Their shared journey was one of courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief in the possibility of a better life. As the sun set over the hills one evening, Daniel watched the sisters walking together along the stream, their laughter carrying lightly through the air. He knew that they were safe, independent, and capable of shaping their own future. The journey that had begun with fear and uncertainty had led to freedom, hope, and the reclamation of dignity. In that moment, he understood the true meaning of courage, not just his own, but theirs as well. Together, they had faced danger, taken bold action, and embraced the possibility of a life filled with choice, joy, and hope.